talk about the theme of the service today. Jennifer is going to be talking about throwing out people-pleasing. It's going to be talking about boundaries. We should all cheer that somebody's talking about boundaries today. They're so vital. So you're going to want to take notes. There's a place in your worship handout that says sermon notes where you can take notes profusely as Jennifer speaks today. It's really going to benefit us. And so why don't we put our hands together and welcome one of our own very warmly, Jennifer Miller. Come on up.
Take myself off mute.
Cover for me.
So, as Ryan said, I am a counselor and a pastor. I am also a recovering people pleaser, so it's quite appropriate that I am teaching this sermon this morning because I'm just going to share with you what I myself have gone through and what I've learned, and hopefully that can benefit you as well if you happen to struggle with the same thing. And so I was really bad growing up all the way into my 20s, but particularly adolescence. I really wanted people to like me. I wanted to fit in. I didn't naturally fit in, so I had to kind of go over the top with my behavior sometimes, trying to get people to like me. And I would bring gifts. For example, if I made brownies at home, I'd bring the whole pan to school, and before you knew it, everybody had eaten it and walked away, and I didn't get any, nor did I make any friends. But it was my attempt, right, to bring things and get people to like me. I would also do favors for people. I was the teacher's pet, and so people often would reach out to me for homework help. And my mom finally had to put the kibosh on that because I would literally stay up until 9, 10 o'clock at night helping others with their homework, not having started my own, because I couldn't say no to people. And so I would do whatever I could. I would dress a certain way, I would talk a certain way, I would do my hair to try to fit in with the people that I wanted to accept me and to want to be around, have me around, right? And see, and that's the problem, is that I was so caught up in the idea that if they didn't like me, if they didn't accept me, then all of a sudden I wouldn't be loved, I wouldn't be wanted, I wouldn't be significant. I started to question my place in life, my purpose in the world. I started wondering if I was worth anything, if I was significant at all. And I think that is kind of the core, that's at the heart of what people-pleasing is about. And so if you're taking notes, it's actually my first point, that people-pleasing is an attempt to meet your most intrinsic need to be loved. So we know all about our physical needs, right? Even my son was counting them off to me this morning. We need to, drink and eat and breathe and all of those things physically, but what about internally? What about emotionally? What about spiritually? And I think our most intrinsic need is to be loved, to be wanted, to be accepted, to know that people know us and still like us, still want us around. We fear being isolated and alone. And so I think that that's really what people-pleasing is about. We just want people to fill that void, to meet that need. And as I was studying Scripture, it was really nice to see that I wasn't alone, that there's a lot of examples actually of people behaving a certain way, doing things a certain way in order to get people to like them or to accept them or to approve of them. But the example that stood out the most to me is of the Apostle Peter. And he's actually my favorite apostle for a lot of different reasons. And I'm just going to go briefly through some examples because there's just literally too many to pull up all the scripture and read it to you, just to get a sense for how Peter was a people pleaser and how he kind of struggled with it. So there's this one example in Matthew 18 where they're talking about forgiveness. And you may know the saying, but let me give you a little context first. You see, the spiritual leaders of that day, they actually taught that if somebody kept offending you or hurting you in the same way, you only had to forgive them 3 times and then you're all good. So 3 times you're off the hook. And so here comes Peter up to Jesus and he's thinking, all right, I'm going to raise the bar. And so he says, okay, Jesus, what if I forgive my brother 7 times? Can you just imagine the internal dialogue that Peter's doing? He's like, okay, Pharisees say 3. I'm going to go with 7. And then Jesus is just going to think how amazing I am because I'm just so generous with this forgiveness thing, right? And then Jesus totally throws him off when he says, no, Peter, try 70 times 7. Then you might get close to how much forgiveness you actually need to extend to people. There's also another example of an event called the Transfiguration. Sounds really fancy, but what it was is Jesus took Peter, James, and John, and he actually showed them a glimpse of what he looked like in heaven. And all of a sudden, there appeared like Moses and Elijah. And of course, Peter, James, and John fall down, totally freaked out by this whole thing. But it was Peter who spoke up and he said, okay, Jesus, should we build you like some shelters so we can just stay here and just like worship you guys? And Jesus is like, no, that's not what this was about. Not at all. Now, there was one time that Peter actually did get it right. Jesus was interested to hear, like, what's everybody saying about me? I know people are talking about me. I'm starting to rile things up. So what are people saying about me? And of course, the apostles are like, well, some say you're Elijah, some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're some other kind of prophet, come back. And he said, okay, but who do you say I am? And Peter spoke up and said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, right answer, good job. You got it right this time. But it was always Peter who spoke up. The night that Jesus got arrested, before that happened, they had the Last Supper. And right before that, Jesus went and washed the feet of the apostles. Now, if you think about it, this is 2,000 years ago. They didn't have paved roads, and they wore sandals, and so their feet got really disgusting. And it was the job of the lowest servant in the house to wash their feet when they came inside. And on this night, all of a sudden, Jesus himself is kneeling down and washing people's feet. And when he got to Peter, what did Peter say? No, you shall never wash my feet, because that's just beneath you, and I want to really make you happy with me. And then Jesus said, well, if you don't let me do this, then you have nothing, no part of me. And then Peter said, okay, then wash my head and my hands, just like wash all of me then. I mean, Peter just constantly was trying to get the approval of Jesus. Now, is this a bad thing, right? I mean, should we really be worried about getting the approval of Jesus? Well, it's not that. It's not that we shouldn't want to please Jesus. It's not even that we shouldn't want to please each other, or that we should all of a sudden quit caring what people think of us. I mean, we don't want to swing the pendulum from one extreme to the other. We are relational creatures. God made us for relationship. So we should be mindful of how we're impacting each other. We should care, if people like us. I think it's the motive behind the behavior. And isn't that true with just about everything? It's not what you're doing, it's the reason you're doing it. It's the heart with which you're doing it. Because you see, what I wonder is how big of a role was it in Peter's mind and in his heart when he was doing these things to try to attempt to get Jesus to think a certain way about him, or to feel a certain way about him, or to do something for him. When we start to become dependent on how people are thinking and feeling about us, that we do certain things, we say certain things in order to shape and mold people's opinions, to get them to like us, to accept us, to want us. So it's not bad that Peter actually cared what Jesus thought of him. We all should. And it's not bad that we care what other people think about us. We should to a certain extent. The question is how dependent are you on that? How lost are you if people don't like you? I mean, I have met so many people who just can't stand the idea of people not liking them, because all of a sudden they lose their sense of self, their sense of purpose. They all of a sudden don't feel loved and wanted. That intrinsic need goes unmet. So the problem with people-pleasing is now we become dependent. That's point number 2. We become dependent on external sources to meet an internal need. Now, how successful are we going to be at that? Right? We have this internal need, and all of a sudden now we're dependent on external things to fill it. And that's why for some people, people-pleasing actually almost becomes like an addiction. Because just like with every other addiction, what are we really trying to do? Meet an internal need with external things. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because all of a sudden now I need you to like me in order to feel okay about myself, in order to know who I am. So then the question is, okay, so if we change that, do we all of a sudden have to go with that need unmet? Do we all of a sudden just, now I have to figure out how to live my life knowing people don't like me? That's not it at all. There's actually an alternative, and Peter himself went through a transformation in his own people-pleasing. Now, Ryan last week talked about the idea of how you can pick up right? People pleasing, and you can toss it out, but if you're not paying attention, all of a sudden it slowly makes its way back in. And that's the same with Peter. He went through a transformation, but we can read a story in Galatians 2 where Paul called him on the fact that he was acting one way when his Jewish friends were around and another way when they weren't. So Peter still struggled with it. It's not like all of a sudden he saw the light and bingo bango, like this lifelong issue is resolved. It's about starting this process, getting a different perspective, a different mindset, and then continuing to stay on that path rather than slipping to the easier path. And so I'm actually going to share with you from Acts 4, Peter's transformation. Okay, so I just laid out for you what kind of people pleaser that Peter was. And then Jesus, we know he gets arrested, he gets killed, goes in the ground, comes back up alive 3 days later, and he walks around for 40 days. He's still teaching, he's still, people get to see him, and then he ascends into heaven. So this is happening in Acts 4, which is only 3 chapters after Jesus ascended. And something happened. They were just totally on fire for God, and they start speaking to people about Jesus, and they start healing people. And the religious leaders weren't too keen on that idea. And so, starting in verse 5, it says, the next day the rulers, this is the same council that just killed Jesus a couple months before. The elders and the teachers of the law met in Jerusalem. Annas the high priest was there, and so was Caiaphas, John, Alexander, and others of the high priest's family. They had Peter and John brought before them and began to question them. By what power or what name did you do this? Then Peter, always Peter, right? Filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, rulers and elders of the people, if we are being called to account today for an act of kindness shown to a man who is lame and are being asked how he was healed, then know this, you and all the people of Israel, it is by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, but whom God raised from the dead, that this man stands before you healed. Jesus is the stone you builders rejected, which had become the cornerstone. So let's just pause there for a second. Peter, the one who hid when Jesus was arrested and denied him and was scared, the one who just wanted everybody to like him, is now standing in front of the very council that killed Jesus and saying, this Jesus who you crucified and you rejected, that's who I'm doing it for. Do you see the transformation? I mean, the people pleaser in me just totally cringes at the idea of standing before authority that just killed Jesus, and now speaking this boldly. It says, salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. And when they saw, that being the council, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. So at this point, the council goes and kind of meets, off to the side and discusses what they're going to do. And then the council calls Peter and John back in again and commanded them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John replied, which is right in God's eyes, to listen to you or to listen to him? You be the judges. As for us, we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard. That right there is an outright rejection of people-pleasing. Like, is it better for us to please you or for us to please God? It's better for us to please God. The people-pleaser all of a sudden isn't there. He's being bold and he's like standing up for himself, and he's risking rejection, profound rejection, meaning like rejection out of the synagogue was both the religious site but also their cultural, their community. Rejection from their families, because if they got basically excommunicated by the Jewish leaders, they wouldn't be allowed in the temple, in the synagogues. Their families wouldn't be able to celebrate the high holidays with them. I mean, this was a big risk. So how did that happen? How did Peter go from being that absolute people pleaser to now being so bold that he's risking the ultimate rejection? And the answer is that he figured out who he was. And that's the key. Ryan said I was going to be talking about boundaries, and that's really what boundaries are. It is a defining line. It defines what is me and what is not me. What is mine, what is not mine. What I get to control and what I don't. And that's the third point. So if you want a definition of boundaries, it's really just a defining line I know where I end and you begin. I know what I get to control. Because people pleasers are just profoundly confused by all of this. They don't really know where they leave off. They don't really know what's theirs. They don't really understand what they can control. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning. So if you'll indulge me, could you all just stand up for a second? Oh, look at all the people pleasers in the room. All right. Hands down by your side. And I want you to turn in a really tight circle right where you stand. All right. You just drew a circle on the ground and you get to control everything inside of it. Pretty cool, right? Everything. You get to control everything in there, and you don't get to control anything else. So who's inside that circle? Me. Who's not inside that circle? Everybody else. Okay? Go ahead and have a seat. And I'm serious about that. That is your circle of control. And I whip out my handy-dandy marker. This is my circle of control. And you have your circle of control, and so does everybody else. And so what resides inside my circle of control is me, right? So what's inside of me? Well, that would include my thoughts, right? What I think, what I believe, what my opinion is. Because people pleasers tend to kind of sacrifice that. We get literally kind of wishy-washy about that, because if I speak up and I say something and you don't like it, all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, I'm just kidding, I totally agree with you. I'll just go with you, whatever you said, right? What else is inside my circle of control? My feelings. Sounds kind of weird that you can control your feelings, right? What that means is that you own them. You're responsible for them. You're the only one who feels your feelings. Okay? And so we tend to like to blame people for our feelings and make others responsible. We even hear it in our everyday language. You are making me so mad. Right? All of a sudden I'm like trying to take my feelings and make others responsible for them. Our actions. There's a lot more that goes in our circle of control, but I tend to focus on those three. Our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, our choices, our behavior, what I choose to say and do. Now, outside of that, so where does everybody else fall, right? This would be our circle of influence. And what's in there? Everybody else. Everybody else. You can't control them. The best you can do is influence them. Now, the people who are closest to you, you have the most influence over. The people who are kind of further away, less influence, right? I have way more influence over my kids than I do on a stranger, than I do the lady at the supermarket counter. Okay? So we think about who's in our circle of influence, and I don't think we pay enough attention to the fact that we influence others. I don't think we take seriously that honor, that privilege, and that responsibility, because we really do impact people. Now, does that make me responsible? No. It makes me responsible for my choices, and then paying attention to how that influences others. That's how I can say we can still care whether or not people like us. We can still care about that. I'm just not taking responsibility. Because what we end up doing is we bump up against somebody else's circle of control. And this can be anybody. Okay? And we bump up against their circle of control, and all of a sudden we think, you know what? If I bring brownies to school, I can get them to think I'm a nice person. Or if I stay up late and I help them with their homework, then maybe they'll feel like they like me. They'll have these positive feelings toward me. And maybe they'll even invite me to hang around. They'll invite me to go out with them. Right? They'll spend time with me. And that's a lot of times what we end up doing is we start reaching our grubby little hands over into other people's circle of control. Or maybe we go the other way and we let others reach into ours. See, most people are notorious for doing that without even realizing it. So for example, I'm just going to use my kids as an example. I have not yet met a parent who doesn't in some way think that they can control their kids. right? So if all of a sudden my child has a different opinion from me, oh, no, honey, no, we don't think that. We don't believe that in here. We don't do that, right? Or if your child's like, I don't know that I like this. Oh, yes, you do. Yeah, you love piano. We just love it, right? Okay, we start trying to control, right? Or behavior. See, here's a really funny thing about the behavior thing. When they're little, we physically can pick them up and put them somewhere, right? I can semi kind of control it. But once they get too big for that, then there's this little game that starts to play where all of a sudden I'm like, be quiet. And my child's, seriously, be quiet or else. And then what's the or else, right? So then my child does it again. I'm like, all right, you're grounded for a week. If you don't be quiet, you're going to be grounded for a week. And then they still make noise. Okay, a month. Now you're grounded for a month. Okay, why am I having to up the ante? Because every single attempt is me trying to control their behavior. And it doesn't work. And that's how we end up painting ourselves into that corner where now our child's grounded for 3 months. And we just realize we actually grounded ourselves for 3 months because now my kid's going to be here with me constantly. But we do the same thing with our spouses, with boyfriends and girlfriends, with friends. We try to get them to think, feel, and do what we want them to do. And so this little connection point, so right here where our boundaries meet, so this little line right here, that's our boundary. It defines what is me, what is not me, where I end and you begin. And there's 3 different ways that little line can appear. So, there we go. All right. So there's 3 different ways that line can appear. And the first way is what people pleasers like to do. And I like to draw it like this. Why? Because there's big gaping holes in it. And I actually have a picture because, we always say fences make good neighbors. Well, I believe fences make good everything. And this is an example of the people pleaser fence. You kind of see it, right? But does that give you any indication that it's not okay to just cross the boundary line there? Is there anything that actually will keep something on either side? We kind of look at them, we're like, oh, look, a pretty rundown fence, and we pay no attention to it. People run right through it. That's the people pleaser's boundary. So we show it like that. Now, what happens, though, is that there are people on the other side where the pendulum swings, and it's a different kind. And this is how I like to show it. All right, picture number 2. It's where you have a fence, but you have too much fence, right? It's clearly, these are the people that just have pokey edges. And we really know that not only can I not control this person, but I can't even influence them. They have their guard up so big and so high and so tall, there's just no possible way that I'm going to be able to penetrate that. And what I see is when people pleasers finally get enough of this whole I'm giving and giving and it's not working and people aren't liking me more and they're not accepting me more, what do? We swing over here. The pendulum swings. And that's actually something that happens between these 2. So maybe you can identify with this cycle. So I'm going to give and give and give and just hope that people like me, and then pretty soon I start to feel resentful. So then I swing over here and I'm like, never mind. I get aggressive and I'm like, forget it. I'm not going to help anybody. No, I will not help you. No, I will not bring anything. And we get very aggressive. We end up like this. And then what do? Oh man, I feel so guilty because I just stood up for myself and told people no. So then, okay, sorry, no, never mind. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll help you. Remember how I told you no last week? Well, I really didn't mean it. Will you please be my friend again? Right? And so we go through this little cycle of give, feel resentful, be angry, stand up for your ground, and then, oh man, I just feel really guilty for that. And we spin around and around and around. Anybody identify with that? Yeah, make ourselves crazy. So what's the alternative? Because we don't want to be a people pleaser where we absolutely have no boundaries, no sense of self, and we don't. And what happens is then our circle kind of looks like this. Big gaping holes. So I reach through it to other people's and they reach through it to me too. So that's how I make people responsible for how I feel. It's like my kids ran in. Well, it's not really my fault that I hit my brother because he was aggravating me. What are my kids doing? What do we do? right? Or I'm angry when I'm driving because that was my right of way. He took my right of way. That's what we're doing. We're sitting there totally confused about what is me and what is not me. There are these big gaping holes inside of our boundaries. Now, one dynamic that I think that I see a lot too, in addition to this kind of like cycling thing, is that people with these kind of boundaries tend to attract each other. Okay? So what happens when you get the people pleaser who has, excuse my caveman drawings, this kind of boundary? Well, you end up attracting somebody with this kind, and what do? They get married. They date. They go into business together. They become roommates, right? That's what ends up happening. Why? Because this person has an excess amount of opinion, and this person's just dying to receive it. Because remember when I said this person is dependent on external sources to fill up that internal tank. I need to be loved. I need to be wanted. I need to be accepted. And I'm now completely dependent on this person. But here's the sneaky little secret. This person is just as dependent on them. Because in order to feel good about myself, I am hoping that little crumbs will drop down, right? And I'll actually get some affirmation and some love occasionally. But this person is just as dependent because in order to feel good, they have to take it from somebody else, right? We see these people who are overly confident and really aren't, who maybe are bullies in some way, really controlling. They're just as dependent on this person. Because neither one really has a sense of who they are. What is mine, what is not mine. And they really haven't figured out how to meet that internal need. So what's the option C? Because we don't want either one of those. Option C is clear, healthy boundaries. White picket fence. Right? We all joke about the white picket fence. That's what we want in life. But the thing about the white picket fence is it's clear that that is my yard, right? You know that if you cross it without permission, you're trespassing, but yet it's not like the barbed wire fence. And there's a nice little gate in there. So the people that I want to influence me, I can let them in. And the people that I'm tired of letting influence me, I can put them out and shut that gate. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about clear, healthy boundaries. This is the kind of boundary that God has with us. It's the kind of boundary that Jesus had with his apostles. Because do you think God is confused at all about who he is? No. Do you think he's confused at all about what is his? No. And the beautiful thing is that he gave us free will, and he doesn't violate that. And so he says, okay, you're over there, you have your choices, you own them. I'm over here, I have my choices. And hopefully we're letting God influence us, but he's not going to control us. So this whole people-pleasing thing isn't going to exactly work because he loves us already. And so you're not going to be able to get God to love you more or accept you more or want you more. He already loves you as much as he's going to love you, which is totally, absolutely, and completely. Now it's you just figuring it out. Because if I have a clear sense of who I am and whose I am, then I'm not going to be so desperate and needy and dependent on others filling it up. Because I can all of a sudden start filling up that internal need from an internal source, that emotional need from a God that is love. And then he's going to bring people in my life to be a physical representation of that. And I do want them to like me. I don't want them to dislike me. But I'm not going to be dependent on it either. And so that is my fourth point. Knowing who you are in Christ is the only way you can truly have healthy boundaries and finally have that intrinsic need satisfied. And that's what we're looking for, right? We all want to be loved. We want to be wanted. We want to be accepted. But if you're dependent on a person who is imperfect, and let's just be real, most of us are selfish a lot of the time and really kind of absorbed in my own needs, then there's going to be a lot of missed opportunities, a lot of moments where we're left kind of wanting, lacking, needing more and not getting any more. So when we look at these boundaries, the clear boundaries give me a clear sense of who I am, and all of a sudden I don't have this kind of mismatched relationship. All of a sudden, it's balanced, It's even. It's reciprocal. And I can be okay with people not liking me. In fact, the chances that not everybody's going to like me are pretty good, right? It's impossible to get everybody to like you or to approve of you, because we're going to have different opinions, and that's okay. And so if I can take ownership of what I think and what I feel and what I do, and I can honor you, because reaching across, trying to people please, trying to manipulate to get my needs met, dishonors the other person. Because now, rather than allowing you the choice to whether or not you like me, you think well of me, you want to invite me out to dinner with you, I'm now trying to coerce it, control it, and manipulate it. It dishonors the other person. And so in this place, we have mutual respect. We honor one another. We appreciate one another. And this is how we're going to get that need met, and the only way we really can get it met. So last week, Ryan introduced a house cleaning tool, and hopefully you all got it with your worship folder if you want to pull that out. I brought my little people-pleasing example. So last week's example was a guy, so this week's example is a girl. And so the instructions is that I want you to go and I want you to do a brain dump. I want you to just write down what you really think and feel about people-pleasing. About the idea, okay, I want you to picture telling someone important in your life no. And then write down all the thoughts that come up, because there may be some pushback and some freak out about that. Or picture in your mind the fact that not everybody's going to like you, and that there's nothing you can do about it. What does that stir up in you? So do your brain dump about your people-pleasing. So I just made one up, and it says, I really want the ladies in my Bible study to like me. You see, I worry that if I can't find a way to fit in, that I will be an outcast in the group. I should volunteer to bring snacks every week so that they will see what a likable person I am. See, I need everybody in the group to approve of me. I can't handle feeling unwanted all the time. I think this group can help me feel better about myself. So the thing about the next step is we're going to read through that statement. So just no judgment, just completely, just brain dump everything, being authentic and real about what you think. And then we're going to read through the statement, and we're going to find anything that's not true. And so I like to tell people, when you read the statement, is it true? Really true? All the time true for everybody? Because we tend to make exceptions, right? And we talk about my truth, and well, it's true for me, but it's not true for you. No, we're talking about, is it really true all the time for everybody? And so let's look through and see what happens when we search for untruth. Oh my goodness, everything but the first sentence goes away. Is it because everything in all the other sentences is untrue? No, it's because something in every sentence is untrue. Something in there violates boundaries and is an attempt to control or manipulate other people to think, feel, or do a certain way. And so all of a sudden, I worry that if I can't find a way to fit in, I'll be an outcast in the group. Worry is another word for fear. And usually fear is a lie, or based on a lie of some kind, okay? So unless you're sitting there facing like a poisonous snake, okay, that fear is appropriate, right? That's based on truth. But the idea that if I can't get everybody in the group to like me, I'm going to be an outcast. Is that true? Is that true? Really true all the time? Every single group, if you can't get them to like you, you're going to be an outcast, a pariah. No, it's not true. I should volunteer to bring snacks every week so they will see what a likable person I am. Okay, what is she trying to do here? She's trying to get them to think a certain way. They're trying to see something in her that if all of a sudden I'm super helpful and I volunteer to do all this stuff, everybody will see what a great person I am and they'll like me. Okay, this is again an attempt reaching over into their circles of control, trying to get them to think and feel a certain way. I need everyone in the group to approve of me. Is that true? Does she really need it? Really, truly need everybody to like her? No. It seems true, but it's not actually true. One little trick I'll do is how people are talking to themselves. What if you had a friend coming to you saying that? What if a friend said, I really need everybody in this group to like me? What would you say to them? because that truth is going to apply to you just as well. No, you don't need everybody in the group to like you or approve of you. I can't handle feeling unwanted all the time. Okay, all or nothing statements, generally not true, okay? And so unless you're talking about God, because God's probably the only one who is loving all the time and faithful all the time, but when it comes to people, when it comes to our circumstances, is it true that I feel unwanted all the time, 24/7, every single second of the day? Is that true? No. It may seem like it is, but anytime you start seeing black or white, all or nothing phrases, just cross it out because it's not going to be true. I think this group can help me feel better about myself. Do you hear the manipulation in that? Yeah. So then let's write the sentences again, this time only using truth. I am a beloved daughter of God. Let's just start there. I'm a beloved child of God. Clear boundaries. I know who I am. I really want the ladies in my Bible study to like me. This Bible study is important to me because it gives me a chance to connect with God and with other women. So is it true the Bible study is important to her? Yeah. She wants to connect with these other women. See, I didn't like feeling unwanted in past relationships because that's really what it's about. Feeling unwanted has to do with relationship. And so there were past relationships where maybe she did honestly feel unwanted, or maybe she really was unwanted. I choose to volunteer to bring snacks to some of the meetings. Okay, let's start taking that all or nothing out, and let's start taking responsibility for our actions. So she's going to choose to bring some snacks to some of the meetings. I choose to honestly be myself and refrain from attempts to make people like me. Maybe I'll make some friends in this group. Do you see the difference? Do you see the truth in that versus where she was in the past phrases? Because it just takes a little bit. I once did this little object lesson with my kids where I took apple juice and apple cider vinegar, okay? And I put them in 2 cups, and I had a third cup in the middle, and I was like, okay, taste and I was nice. I started with the apple cider vinegar. Taste this and just take a little sip, and they're like, oh, that's so bad. Okay, now do the apple juice. Ooh, this is good. I want some more of this. Okay, what if I put all the apple juice and just a little bit of the apple cider vinegar? Now, do you want to taste it? No, it tastes awful, but I just put a little bit of the apple cider vinegar, just a little. Still, it ruined the whole thing. Exactly. All you need is just a little bit of untruth, just one absolute statement, just one fear-based statement, and that takes you off course. And you're no longer holding clear boundaries. You now have the people pleaser or the bully. You're now manipulating. You're now reaching outside of your control and trying to control something you have no business doing. Remember, my circle of control is here. I get to control me. I can't control anybody or anything else. All I can do is influence. And so that's why she was hoping to make friends. And I'm just going to honestly be myself, and maybe some people will like me. And that's true, right? Maybe some will, because you're not going to get all of them to. So hopefully that gives you, I normally spend a long time talking about boundaries, so I tried to give you guys a snippet in a short period of time. And if you do have kids, I go into this a lot more in the parenting class that I'm teaching. So Revolutionize Your Parenting, and it actually is using Love and Logic, if you're familiar with Love and Logic, but I infuse a lot of my counseling experience into the class, and it's going to be Monday nights starting October 7th, and it's going to be at the new center. Ryan mentioned the center, and it opens October 1st. And the parenting class is going to be Mondays, starting October 7th. So feel free to contact me, sign up. There's also flyers over in the kids section. But if this really kind of affected you, especially a lot of us form our boundaries because of our own childhood and our own experiences with our parents. And I don't know about you, but I really want to diligently not pass on my flaws to my kids. And so I'm trying to be very mindful of the boundaries and trying to, you know what, if my child doesn't like something, he authentically doesn't like it, I'm going to sit there and try to coach him on how can you express that without being disrespectful or mean, right? And so we can't pass on what we don't ourselves have. And so this is an opportunity, if you guys are interested, if you have kids, you can join the class. So.